The FBI's secret files on Marilyn Monroe. They reveal some of her friends were suspected communists, and she once considered traveling to the Soviet Union. The FBI kept files on her from 1955 until her death in 1962.
For more than 60 years, the world has held on to a single story. It's a simple, sad story about a Hollywood icon who died too young. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe's death was officially ruled a probable suicide. That conclusion closed the case file, but it threw open the door to a lifetime of questions. But what if that official story isn't the whole story? What if all the inconsistencies and nagging questions that have been brushed aside for decades aren't just minor details, but clues pointing to something else entirely? After all these years of whispers and theories, looking at the evidence that was overlooked, dismissed, or just plain vanished, a different picture begins to emerge. It's a picture that might be far more disturbing than anyone wanted to believe. And it's not good. The story you know is that a lonely, depressed actress decided to end her life with a bottle of pills. The Los Angeles police concluded it was a self-inflicted overdose and closed the book. But the book never really stayed shut, because the facts of the case never quite added up. One of the first cops on the scene, Sergeant Jack Clemens, took one look at the room, the body lying in a strangely neat position, and immediately felt something was off. His suspicions, however, were quickly dismissed. What came next wasn't a deep investigation, but a carefully managed story. Today, we're going to look at the cracks in that story. We'll examine the timeline that feels off, the forensic evidence that seems to contradict the official report, and the powerful people who may have had reasons to want Marilyn Monroe quiet. This isn't just about rehashing old theories. It's about exploring the haunting questions that the official reports have failed to answer for over 60 years. Before we get into the weeds of all the questions and suspicions, it's important to understand the official version of events, the story the world was told in 1962. It's a narrative built on a few key testimonies and what seemed to be a clear-cut coroner's report. According to the official account, Marilyn's last night began on Saturday, August 4th. She was reportedly depressed and retreated to her bedroom in her Brentwood home. The last person to have supposedly seen her alive was her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, who later said that Marilyn went to her room for the night around 8 p.m. The timeline then jumps to the middle of the night. At about 3 a.m. on August 5th, Murray said she woke up feeling uneasy. She saw a light under Marilyn's door, and when she got no answer, she called Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. He supposedly told her to look in the window. When she did, she saw Marilyn Monroe, naked and motionless on her bed. Dr. Greenson arrived soon after. He broke a window to get into the locked bedroom and found his famous patient was dead. On her nightstand was an empty bottle of Nembutal sleeping pills, and many other pill bottles were found in the room. It wasn't until about 4:25 a.m. that the police were finally called. When the authorities arrived, the scene seemed to back up the story of an overdose. The official coroner's report stated that Monroe's blood contained lethal levels of chloral hydrate and Nembutal. The levels were huge, enough to kill several people. Based on these results, her known history of depression, and past suicide attempts, the coroner, Dr. Theodore Curfey, reached his conclusion. The cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning, and the manner was probable suicide. He argued it couldn't have been an accident because the sheer amount of drugs in her system meant she would have had to swallow them all at once. To the public, it was a tragic, but believable, ending for a famously turbulent star. It was a neat story that allowed the world to mourn. But this official story has been questioned from the very beginning. Almost immediately, people close to the case started noticing things that didn't make sense. Questions that were never asked, and evidence that seemed to have been ignored. The official story hinges on the timeline given by the housekeeper, Eunice Murray, and the psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, which puts the discovery of Marilyn's body around 3:30 a.m. But this timeline has been challenged for decades, with some suggesting it was fabricated to hide a gap of several hours. One of the biggest issues is the delay in calling the police. Murray and Greenson's account of discovering the body in the pre-dawn hours and calling the police at 4:25 a.m. has been contradicted by other accounts. For example, some authors and researchers have pointed to neighbors who reported seeing an ambulance at Monroe's house much earlier in the night. One of the most dramatic, though unverified, claims came from an ambulance driver named Ken Hunter, who in later interviews alleged his company was called to the house earlier that night. In his version of events, he claimed Marilyn was comatose but alive and died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, at which point a decision was made to return her body to the house. While this account has never been substantiated and is not part of any official investigation, it's one of the many alternative timelines that have fueled speculation for years. Eunice Murray's own story has also come under scrutiny. Her initial statement to the police established the 3 a.m. discovery. Years later, however, in a 1985 interview, she reportedly admitted that Robert F. Kennedy had been at Marilyn's house on the day she died and that the death occurred earlier in the evening. Her son-in-law, Norman Jeffries, also present at the house, has been cited in some books with similar claims about a tense atmosphere that day. These later accounts are highly disputed and not backed by primary evidence, but they have become a key part of the mystery. Then there's what the first officer on the scene, Sergeant Jack Clemens, observed. When he arrived, he noted something odd. Eunice Murray was doing laundry. To a veteran detective, washing bed sheets in the middle of the night, right after finding a body, seemed highly suspicious and suggested a possible attempt to clean the scene. Clemens also noted that the room itself seemed too neat. Marilyn's body was lying in a position that seemed inconsistent with the convulsions that often accompany a massive barbiturate overdose. There was also no glass of water by the bed, which would be expected if someone had swallowed dozens of capsules. The whole scene felt staged to his trained eye. A 1982 review of the case by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office acknowledged these factual discrepancies and unanswered questions, but ultimately found there wasn't enough evidence to launch a new criminal investigation. Still, the sheer number of questions about the timeline can't be dismissed. It raises a huge question: why would the timeline need to be altered? What could have happened in those alleged missing hours? If the timeline has cracks, many argue the forensic evidence blows a hole right through the official story. The cause of death, probable suicide by swallowing pills, is challenged by some of the findings in the autopsy itself. The medical evidence doesn't just raise questions, it points to what some experts believe is a scientific inconsistency. The autopsy was done by Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who would later become the famed coroner to the stars. The toxicology report was clear: Marilyn died from a massive overdose of barbiturates. But the real question is how those drugs got into her system. For someone to have swallowed 40 to 50 pills, as the official story implies, there should have been some evidence in her digestive system, like chalky residue or undissolved pill casings. Dr. Noguchi found none. He noted in his report that Marilyn's stomach was almost empty. This finding has been called a scientific near-impossibility by some who question the suicide ruling. However, other experts, including forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht, have stated that with an empty stomach, the drugs could have been absorbed rapidly without leaving significant residue. This forensic puzzle has led many to speculate about other ways the drugs could have been administered. One of the most persistent theories, though it remains unproven, is that Marilyn was given a fatal enema. This would bypass the stomach entirely, allowing for rapid absorption into the bloodstream and explaining the lethal drug levels without any evidence in the stomach. Adding to the controversy, Dr. Noguchi took tissue samples from various organs for more detailed testing. These samples could have provided a more complete picture of how the drugs were administered. However, these organ samples, along with slides of her stomach contents, were reportedly unavailable for later review, with Dr. Noguchi himself expressing frustration over their disappearance. This disappearance of key evidence has been a major red flag for those who suspect a cover-up. There were also questions about the state of her body. Sergeant Clemens wasn't the only one who thought the scene looked wrong. Fresh bruising was noted on her lower back and hip during the autopsy, which Dr. Noguchi later said was never fully explained. Deputy Coroner Lionel Grandison later made the controversial claim that he signed the death certificate under duress and saw reports indicating bruises that suggested she had been handled or restrained. Dr. Noguchi did a meticulous search of her body for needle marks and found none, which seemed to rule out a typical injection. But it doesn't rule out the enema theory, which requires no needles. When you put it all together, the empty stomach, the missing samples, and the strange condition of the body, the official suicide story starts to look less certain. The body itself was telling a confusing story, one that didn't fully align with the official conclusion. In a typical investigation, physical evidence is carefully preserved. But in Marilyn Monroe's case, a pattern emerged where key items seemed to vanish. This trail of missing evidence has fueled speculation that something was being deliberately hidden. The most famous piece of missing evidence is her Little Red Diary. For decades, rumors have swirled about a diary where Marilyn supposedly wrote down her most explosive secrets. According to some sources, this wasn't just a personal journal, but her insurance policy, where she detailed sensitive conversations with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. The legend of the diary persists because it offers a powerful motive for a cover-up, silencing a woman who knew too much. However, no authenticated diary has ever been found, and its existence remains unproven, but the diary wasn't the only thing to go missing. Monroe's detailed phone records from the weeks leading up to her death also disappeared. These records could have provided an undeniable log of who she was talking to in her final days. When later investigators tried to find them, they were gone. Without them, a crucial map of her last conversations was erased. Then there were the psychiatric tapes. Marilyn was in intense therapy with Dr. Ralph Greenson, and their sessions were reportedly recorded. These tapes could have offered a unique window into her state of mind. Former prosecutor John Miner famously claimed to have heard the tapes before they disappeared, insisting they proved Marilyn was not suicidal and was making plans for the future. His claims remain controversial, but the fact that these tapes have never surfaced is another piece of the puzzle that's conveniently missing. Finally, official police and FBI files related to Monroe have been lost, destroyed, or heavily redacted over the years. This systematic erasure of the official record makes a modern reinvestigation nearly impossible and ensures that we may never know the full story of what the authorities knew in 1962. The pattern is hard to ignore. The diary, the phone records, the psych tapes, the official files, each of these items could have potentially contradicted the official suicide story. And each one was removed from the board. It's as if a ghost went through the machine, carefully plucking out every piece that could provide a clear answer. To really dig into the theory surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death, you have to talk about the Kennedys. The alleged involvement of President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, is the explosive heart of the entire mystery. While official investigations have found no credible evidence to support these claims, they provide the motive that drives most of the murder and cover-up theories. It's been widely reported that Marilyn Monroe had a relationship with President Kennedy. Their most public moment came just 3 months before her death, when she sang her sultry, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," at Madison Square Garden. That performance was a public display of their intimacy, one that reportedly made powerful people very nervous. After that night, it's believed JFK began to distance himself from Marilyn and may have passed her off to his brother, Robert Kennedy. Many sources believe Marilyn's relationship with RFK also became romantic, though this is debated. Suddenly, Marilyn wasn't just having an affair, she was entangled with the two most powerful men in the country, according to biographers and investigative authors. By the summer of 1962, Marilyn was seen as a potential liability. Feeling used and abandoned, she reportedly started calling the White House and the Department of Justice, threatening to hold a press conference and reveal everything, not just her affairs, but also state secrets she claimed to have written down in her diary. This threat would have made her a political time bomb. A public scandal involving the president and the attorney general could have been catastrophic for the administration. This provides the motive for the most controversial claim in the entire case, that Robert F. Kennedy was in Los Angeles and visited Marilyn's home on August 4, the day she died. This allegation is not proven fact and has been heavily disputed, but it's supported by some later witness accounts, including a 1983 interview with her housekeeper, Eunice Murray. The alleged purpose of the visit was to retrieve incriminating evidence, like the diary. This theory places the Attorney General of the United States at the scene just hours before Marilyn's body was officially found. It would also explain why the LAPD's investigation was so brief and why a grand jury inquest was never held, which is unusual for such a high-profile death. The power of the Attorney General's office would certainly be enough to contain a situation and ensure the quiet cooperation of local law enforcement. While no official investigation has ever found credible evidence of murder or a cover-up orchestrated by the Kennedys, the circumstantial claims are powerful. The theory has a motive, a supposed opportunity, and the power to conceal it all. Whether true or not, the story of Marilyn's death is inseparable from her connection to the Kennedy dynasty. We've looked at the official story, the questionable timeline, the confusing forensic evidence, the missing records, and the powerful figures who had a motive to want Marilyn Monroe silent. The official ruling of probable suicide leaves a lot of questions unanswered. So, we want to know what you think. Based on everything you've heard, what do you believe really happened on that night in August 1962? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into history's biggest unsolved mysteries, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. So, is the Marilyn Monroe mystery really solved? Legally, no. The official cause of death is still probable suicide. The 1982 Los Angeles District Attorney's review, despite noting inconsistencies, found no credible evidence to support claims of foul play, but when you weigh all the circumstantial evidence, the official story starts to feel incomplete. The solution to the mystery isn't one single piece of smoking gun evidence, but the undeniable pattern of questions that emerged. Let's recap. We have an official timeline that has been contradicted by some witnesses. We have an autopsy with forensic findings that some experts say are inconsistent with a simple oral overdose. We have a trail of missing evidence, including a legendary, but unproven, diary, phone records, and psychiatric tapes that could have answered so many questions. And finally, we have a powerful motive for a cover-up, centered on her relationships with President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. When you piece all this together, the theory of suicide feels less like a certainty and more like one possible explanation among many. The alternative, that Marilyn Monroe was silenced because she knew too much, becomes a compelling, if chilling, theory. Her death starts to look less like a simple tragedy and more like a potential political casualty, followed by an incredibly effective cleanup. The story isn't just that a fragile star took her own life. A darker story suggests that a smart, powerful woman got caught in a dangerous game and became a threat that was neutralized. The sinister possibility isn't just that Marilyn Monroe died, but that her true story was erased, her secrets buried and her death rewritten to protect powerful men. And for over 60 years, that official story has held. But the truth, whatever it is, has a way of leaving a shadow behind. And the shadow of what really happened to Marilyn Monroe continues to haunt us.